Now let's go through a few examples as the flop caller in position when check 2 on the turn. Let's go through this spot first. 40 big blinds deep, under the gun +1 raises, button calls, that's going to be you. Flop comes ace, jack 5, 2 spades, under the gun +1 bets a third pot. As you know, they're going to do with a very mixed strategy, right? They're not going to bet with everything in this scenario. They are going to be betting with, well, every hand some portion of the time in a balanced ratio. And then you opt to call on the button, as you know you're going to do with a pretty wide range as well because you're in position getting good pot odds, right? Now the turn comes and they check. As you can see on the turn, it's pretty much going to be close to 50-50 on every single turn. One big exception here is the king of spades, and that's because when under the gun +1 raises and you call, and then the turn's the king of spades, if you think about it, they really don't have a whole lot of flushes in their range at this point because, like, what flushes are they even raising with pre-flop? I mean, they have maybe queen 10 of spades, queen jack of spades, jack 10 of spades, 10 9 of spades, 9 8 of spades, 8 7 of spades. Maybe slightly wider with the king x suited, but that's really it. But notice when the king of spades comes, they can't have all those king x suited hands, right? The ace is on the board, so they can't have the ace x suited. So really, they only have queen x suited, which they're not playing very many of, right? So they don't have very few flushes in their range at all, whereas you actually do, because you're going to be calling with suited connected stuff on the button quite often. So anyway, this is an interesting scenario. Anyway, they bet the flop, you call, and then we move on to see our equity. As you see, in this scenario, when it's roughly 50-50 across the board, you're going to be doing something like checking about 60% of the time. For the most part, as you see, 60% of the time pretty much across the board, besides exactly the king and the queen of spades, which are the two best cards for you. All right, let's take a look at the implementable strategy here. Let's say the turn is the 6 of spades, which is a marginal card. Let's go through and categorize our range as it makes logical sense. In this scenario, I have essentially 2-pair and better betting. Notice I have pocket 6s, 6-5 suited for 2-pair, ace-6 suited for 2-pair. I have the nut flushes here, and then I actually have it adjusted here. The queen jack of spades, queen 10 of spades, king, jack 10 of spades, and jack 9 of spades are all bet, whereas the middle pairs without a spade are checked behind. And then I'm checking behind with the aces, the other jacks, and some of the 10s and 9s, 8s and 7s, okay? I want to make it clear that in this situation, I think ace-queen is probably good enough to bet. The problem is that I'm kind of having a tough time coming up with too many obvious draws. And notice here, the draws I'm using are already pretty optimistic to some extent. Like I have 5-4, bottom pair turned into a bluff. I have king of spades, queen, and king, queen of spades I'm bluffing with. And then I'm betting here essentially as a bluff with the jack, with the 10 of spades with another 10 and 9 of spades with another 9. Maybe I could use the 8s and the 7s. I kind of feel like those really want to check. But, I mean, we'll see what the solver does in just a second. As you see here, we have about a 1-to-1 ratio, about a 70-30 ratio. I suppose I could take some of the junk. Maybe I'm supposed to take a few more combinations of, like, pocket 8s and bluff it. That could certainly be viable. So yeah, that seems reasonable. I do have king-queen here listed as junk, so maybe I'm supposed to bet more of my king-queens. That could be viable too. Seems like that could be a reasonable strategy. But you see, outlining the range pretty logically, we come up with a pretty balanced ratio where I'm betting about, what's this, 27% of the time? What's the solver do? Solver bets a little bit more, 38% of the time. Let's see which hands they find that I did not. Well, again, the solver's range is going to be different than mine because I elected to just like raise pocket jacks immediately. As you see, pocket jacks actually makes up a decent portion of the solver's range. Solver bets, looks like half of the king, queen of spades. They bet king jack sometimes. Solver has some king tens, which would obviously bet very frequently here. Solver does elect to use the 5-4 as a bet. Interesting to see ace-6 does not actually bet. Seems kind of odd to me. I would think that would be a pretty easy bet. But again, solver does some weird stuff for balance purposes. One thing worth noting here is the solver actually uses an over pot size bet a tiny fraction of the time. Not very often here, but we will see that an over bet is frequently used, or at least a reasonable option in this scenario. So let's keep that in mind. Usually when you are using that giant bet size, you're betting very, very polarized. Like right here, you're betting 5-3 for like bad pair, 5-4 for bad pair, 7-5 for bad pair, but also here you're betting these are all like flushes and sets, right? That said, I don't think it's necessary to use that size in this scenario, that's for sure. So anyway, pretty neat spot. Notice a lot of the aces are checking, like ace-queen's not even betting, right? I think a lot of people get in their minds they're supposed to bet any made hand in this scenario, like an ace, because it's probably ahead. The problem, though, is that if your opponent's good, they're going to be checking with some portion of premium hands that can easily punish the ace-queen. And you really don't want to bet ace-queen here and get raised, right? Also, ace-queen's going to have a spade with it sometimes, which can improve to an almost nut hand on the river if another spade comes. But it is worth noting the spades really don't bet here the aces really don't bet here very often, right? So pretty polarized strategy. And I like the way we outlined our strategy here. What about on the 9 of hearts? This card is going to be a little bit worse for the button. That said, I still think you should roughly use the same strategy where you're betting your 2 pair and better. So here we have just 2 pair and better. Plus I decided to bet with ace-queen. So whenever the third spade does not come, it's more likely ace-queen's the best hand, right? Because now there's not a flush available. So I think it makes logical sense to bet ace-queen. I mean, maybe even ace-10 bets for all I know. I think there's definitely some line in between here where ace-queen can value bet, or maybe it's ace-10, maybe it's even ace-8. Not sure. We'll see what the solver says. In terms of draws, hearts and spades makes a whole lot of sense. Queen 10 makes a whole lot of sense. King 10 makes a whole lot of sense. I opted to use some bottom pairs as well. This is another scenario where maybe the solver uses 8s, 7s, and 6s. I'm not entirely sure. Probably doesn't make sense to bet pocket 10s, I don't think. King Jack doesn't need to bet, right? So again, we just went through and we outlined our range logically, and it turns out we have the 1-to-1 ratio, 70-30 ratio. Nice and pretty, right? And in this scenario, solver checks 60%. I was checking, how many is this? Roughly the same, a little bit less. So solver does bet ace-queen, some ace-10s. So the line right is right in here, somewhere between ace-queen and ace-10. And I know it may sound like a little intuitive that I just kind of like know roughly where this line is, but you have to ask, like, if I bet here and get called, am I loving it with ace-6? And the answer is just no, you're not loving it, right? Like, you're okay, but you're not loving it. But checking back this hand like ace-6 really protects your checking range. And it also goes back to really wanting the 70-30 ratio. And if I bet all my aces, then I'll have like no marginal made hands, right? And the marginal made hands I have are all going to be the junky ones. Also, I have king queen as marginal made hand here. This is probably a bit of an oversight. This should be junk, I think. So this range may even be a little bit weaker than it appears. My bad. I apologize. Okay. 2 pairs are betting. Ace-9's betting. Ace-5's betting. 6-5's betting here. Oh, not 6-5. Well, 6-5 is bluffing, right? So remember, I used some of the bottom pairs as bluffs. And I think it makes sense because we were searching kind of hard to find bluffs in this scenario, right? So when you're searching hard to find bluffs, you just kind of have to use whatever you have. Notice 10s doesn't bet. These really low pairs bet if you have them, which is also kind of neat. Not that I have them in this scenario. It's a cool scenario, right? This is a spot where I think a lot of people make the error of just like betting all their top pairs. And I want to make it really clear. That's not what the solver does. That's not what I do. And that is not what you need to be doing. Just because your opponent checks does not clearly mean they have nothing. Now, if you are playing against someone whose turn checks indicate all junk, take a second, logic out a strategy here. Well, if that's the case, what should you do? Well, you should bet everything, right? Besides perhaps your super nut hands that are not vulnerable to being outdrawn. Because if your opponent's going to fold every time after they check the turn, the pot's yours to seal. So make sure you're always considering your opponent's strategies. But this is how I would play against someone who I think is playing well.